Clara and David Harris appeared to have the perfect life, successful careers, a beautiful home, and twin children. But behind closed doors, betrayal was brewing, and one shocking act of rage would shatter everything they had built. Clara Harris was the type of woman who seemed to have it all. In the eyes of her friends, neighbors, and colleagues, she embodied perfection. Her life in Houston, Texas, appeared flawless. She was a successful dentist with a thriving practice, married to a husband who shared her profession and ambition, and raising twin children in a home that reflected careful attention to detail. Every corner of her house, every outfit she wore, every public appearance she made seemed meticulously planned to convey an image of success, stability, and happiness. To outsiders, the Harris family was the kind of family others envied, a shining example of achievement and domestic bliss. Clara's reputation extended beyond her family. At social events, she was poised, articulate, and polished. She had friends who looked up to her and admired the life she had built. People often commented on how well she balanced her career and family, how she seemed to navigate challenges effortlessly, and how her marriage appeared unshakable. Her life was a carefully constructed facade of control, order, and elegance, and Clara took pride in maintaining it. Behind closed doors, however, the picture was not quite as perfect. While Clara and her husband David had shared years of love, the pressures of their careers, the demands of raising children, and the natural strains of a long-term marriage had begun to create subtle cracks. David, once attentive and loving, had become increasingly distant. Long hours at the office and unexplained late-night meetings had become more frequent, leaving Clara feeling uncertain and increasingly anxious about the state of their relationship. She tried to reassure herself, to focus on the image she projected to the world, but an uneasy suspicion had begun to take root in her mind. Clara's sense of control over her life was challenged in ways she had never anticipated. Every small detail, every carefully maintained routine seemed suddenly vulnerable. The trust she had built in her marriage felt fragile, and she could not ignore the nagging feeling that something was wrong. It was not just about suspicion. It was about a fear of humiliation, of losing the life she had worked so hard to create. She worried about what people would think if the truth about her marriage were to surface. The possibility of betrayal, the idea that the perfect image she had cultivated could be shattered, began to consume her thoughts. Despite these growing doubts, Clara continued to play her role with precision. She smiled at social gatherings, managed her dental practice efficiently, and remained attentive to her children's needs. But beneath the calm exterior, a storm was building. Every interaction with David was measured, every conversation analyzed, and every absence noted. Clara was no longer simply a wife and mother. She had become a detective in her own life, vigilant and watchful, desperately seeking evidence that might confirm or deny her suspicions. The tension between the life she projected and the reality she feared created a pressure that seemed almost unbearable, setting the stage for a series of events that would soon spiral out of control. Clara Harris, the perfect wife, the admired professional and devoted mother, was standing at the edge of a personal abyss. She had everything to lose, yet everything she believed in, trust, love, and control, was slipping from her grasp. The life she had built with care and pride was about to collide with a reality she could no longer ignore, and the consequences of that collision would be both shocking and irreversible. Clara Harris's growing unease soon became unbearable, and she realized she needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The doubts she had felt for months had hardened into suspicion, and she could no longer ignore the signs. David's increasing absences, secretive phone calls, and unexplained trips had begun to dominate her thoughts. The perfect image of their marriage that she had fought so hard to maintain now felt fragile, like a thin glass ready to shatter at any moment. Determined to uncover the reality, Clara made the decision to hire a private investigator, seeking evidence that could either confirm her fears or restore the trust that had begun to erode. The investigation revealed a truth that would forever change the course of Clara's life. Photographs and detailed reports confirmed what she had dreaded. David was having an affair with his receptionist. Images showed them together in moments of intimacy, walking hand in hand, laughing closely, and sharing embraces that once belonged only to Clara. Every photo, every note from the investigator, was a vivid reminder of betrayal, and the carefully constructed world Clara had built for herself began to crumble. The evidence was not abstract or distant. It was concrete, undeniable, and humiliating. The man she had trusted implicitly, the partner she had believed shared her devotion and values, had violated that trust in the most personal way. The emotional impact on Clara was immediate and overwhelming. She felt a mixture of disbelief, anger, and profound humiliation. The betrayal cut deep, not only because of the infidelity itself, but because it undermined the life she had worked tirelessly to perfect. Clara's identity as the perfect wife and devoted mother seemed threatened, and the realization that her carefully curated image could be tarnished by David Harris' actions ignited a burning sense of outrage. The betrayal was no longer a private sorrow. It was a public humiliation that tainted her reputation, her sense of security, and her understanding of the life she thought she knew. Despite the intensity of her emotions, Clara initially attempted to respond rationally. She confronted David, seeking answers and explanations, and he offered promises of change. He assured her that the affair had ended, that he was committed to their marriage, and that he was willing to attend counseling to repair the damage. For a brief moment, it seemed as though reconciliation might be possible. Yet even as she listened to his words, a part of Clara could not let go of the anger and hurt that churned inside her. Trust once broken is rarely restored easily, and the emotional wounds ran far deeper than David's assurances could heal. The knowledge of David's betrayal lingered in Clara's mind, twisting every thought and coloring every interaction. She found herself obsessing over the details, replaying the evidence in her head, and imagining scenarios where she could reclaim control and assert the dignity she felt had been stolen. The combination of humiliation, rage, and heartbreak created a volatile emotional landscape, one in which rational thought and measured response became increasingly difficult. Clara's life, once orderly and predictable, was now dominated by the stark reality of infidelity, and the simmering tension between desire for reconciliation and the need for vengeance began to shape the choices she would soon make. By the time summer arrived in 2002, Clara Harris's life had become a tense battlefield of emotions she could barely contain. The brief hope that David's promises might restore their marriage had vanished. The knowledge of his affair lingered like a shadow over every aspect of her existence. Each day felt like a delicate balancing act as she struggled to maintain her public persona while privately grappling with betrayal, humiliation, and an ever-growing anger that consumed her thoughts. The sense of control she had once relied upon slipped further away with every passing hour, replaced by a growing, almost obsessive need to confront the truth once and for all. Clara's mind repeatedly returned to the evidence she had gathered. The photos of David with his mistress, the notes from the private investigator, and the casual disregard he had shown for her feelings fueled a deep, simmering rage. It was no longer just about emotional pain. It was about pride, about the life she had built being tainted and disrespected. In her mind, she felt cornered, as though every carefully constructed piece of her identity, the successful dentist, the devoted mother, the perfect wife, had been violated. The betrayal was not something she could simply forgive or forget. It demanded a response, though what that response would be had yet to fully materialize in her conscious mind. The breaking point came one summer evening. Clara received confirmation from the private investigator that David was meeting his mistress at a nearby hotel. The news hit her like a physical blow. Every nerve in her body tightened with anticipation and rage. She felt an uncontrollable urge to confront him, to make him face the consequences of his actions immediately. Without hesitation, she drove to the hotel, each mile escalating her sense of urgency and fury. Her thoughts were a chaotic mixture of heartbreak, humiliation, and a desire for retribution. Clara was no longer thinking like the composed professional who had once navigated life with precision. She was consumed by emotion, acting on impulses she had long suppressed. Upon arriving, Clara witnessed a scene that confirmed every fear and suspicion. David stepped from the hotel with the woman, laughing and casually sharing an intimacy that was supposed to belong only to her. The sight was unbearable. The betrayal was real, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. The humiliation she felt was overwhelming, like a fire that consumed every rational thought. The meticulously controlled life she had maintained seemed irrelevant in the face of this vivid, undeniable reality. Clara's emotional storm had transformed into action. She followed David as he walked to his car, the anger inside her driving her forward. Every heartbeat seemed to accelerate, every thought sharpened by fury. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, heightening her senses and narrowing her focus on the one objective that dominated her mind, confronting him, making him pay for the betrayal that had shattered her world. What had begun as suspicion, then transformed into heartbreak, had now reached a point where restraint seemed impossible. Clara Harris, the woman who had once embodied poise and control, was now propelled by a raw, unfiltered rage that would soon have irreversible consequences. You said, the parking lot was quiet that evening, yet charged with an intensity that seemed to ripple through the air. Clara Harris's heart pounded as she maneuvered her car closer, eyes locked on David as he moved toward his vehicle. The fury inside her had become a living, almost tangible force, guiding every motion. She felt as if all the months of betrayal, humiliation, and suppressed rage had condensed into this single moment, a moment that demanded action. In her mind, the perfect life she had constructed was no longer attainable. What remained was the raw, uncontrollable need to respond to the betrayal in a way that would assert her presence and reclaim a sense of power. Clara's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as she began to circle the parking lot, keeping David within sight. The rational part of her brain, the side that had once handled her dental practice with precision and managed the complexities of family life, fought to intervene, to urge caution. But it was overpowered by a storm of emotion that had built to a tipping point. Every step David took, every laugh shared with the other woman, felt like a direct assault on her identity, on the years she had devoted to constructing a life of dignity and control. The humiliation was unbearable, and the rage she felt demanded an immediate response. Witnesses later described seeing Clara's car move aggressively, swerving around the lot in pursuit of her husband. In that moment, she was no longer just a wife betrayed. She had become an instrument of her own anger, acting with a ferocity that stunned anyone who saw her. She could hear the voices around her, but they seemed distant, almost irrelevant, as though the world had narrowed to the single objective of confronting David. The lines between justice, vengeance, and impulsive rage had blurred entirely. What had started as a drive to confront a husband about infidelity transformed into something far more dangerous, far more final. The first impact came suddenly. Clara accelerated and her car struck David, sending him to the ground. The violence of the moment was immediate and shocking, yet it did not satisfy the intensity of her anger. Without pause, she continued, running over him multiple times. Each motion was fueled by a combination of betrayal, pride, and humiliation. The act was not calculated in the measured sense of planning. It was driven by pure emotion, a visceral response to the collapse of the life she had once controlled. Clara's fury had reached a point of no return, and in that moment, the consequences of her actions were fully real, irreversible, and terrifying. The scene in the parking lot became chaos. Onlookers screamed, some rushing to call for help, others frozen in disbelief at the sight of the perfect wife committing an act of unimaginable violence. Clara's stepdaughter, present in the car, was forced to witness the horror firsthand, adding another layer of shock and devastation to the unfolding tragedy. Police arrived quickly and Clara was apprehended, but the reality of what had occurred was undeniable. The woman, once admired for her composure and success, had allowed a surge of rage to override reason entirely, transforming a personal betrayal into a public act of brutality. The life she had meticulously built was shattered in an instant, replaced by a shocking crime that would define her name in the years to come. The arrest of Clara Harris sent shockwaves through the community. The image of the composed, successful dentist was replaced almost immediately by the stark reality of her actions. Police reports, photographs, and witness statements painted a picture that was difficult for anyone to reconcile with the woman they had admired. Clara, once seen as a symbol of poise and perfection, was now the center of a chilling true crime story, her name synonymous with a moment of uncontrollable rage that had led to a husband's death. The nation followed the case closely, fascinated by the tension between her outwardly perfect life and the violence she had unleashed in a single, devastating moment. The trial that followed was as gripping as it was harrowing. Prosecutors argued that Clara Harris had allowed her jealousy and rage to override reason, presenting her actions as deliberate and driven by revenge. The evidence was overwhelming. The private investigators' reports documenting the affair, photographs showing David with his mistress, and accounts from eyewitnesses who had seen Clara pursue and strike her husband in the parking lot. The narrative painted her not only as a wife scorned, but as a woman who had allowed her emotions to escalate into lethal violence. The courtroom was filled with tension, the air heavy with the knowledge that a life had been ended by a moment of uncontrolled anger. The defense sought to explain Clara's actions through the lens of emotional overload, arguing that the betrayal she had suffered, combined with the humiliation and psychological pressure she endured, had pushed her beyond the limits of rational thought. They emphasized her previous reputation as a devoted mother, a respected professional, and a committed wife, portraying the act as a tragic failure of emotional control rather than premeditated murder. Expert witnesses discussed the psychological impact of betrayal and humiliation, highlighting how extreme emotional stress can impair judgment and provoke responses that would otherwise be unimaginable. During the trial, the details of the case drew national attention. Media coverage examined every aspect of Clara's life, from her career achievements to her meticulous social image, contrasting them with the horrific events in the hotel parking lot. People struggled to understand how someone who appeared so composed and successful could commit such a violent act. Public fascination grew, in part because Clara's case challenged assumptions about domestic life, appearances, and the limits of human emotion. The story raised questions about how far a person could be pushed by betrayal and whether love, pride, and humiliation could combine to produce an act of irreversible violence. Ultimately, the jury reached a verdict in 2003. Clara Harris was convicted of murder and sentenced to 20 years in prison. The woman who had once embodied the ideal of success and composure was now remembered for the terrifying moment when emotion eclipsed reason. Her story became a cautionary tale about the fragility of human control, the consequences of betrayal, and the devastating power of unchecked anger. Clara Harris's life, once a carefully maintained symbol of perfection, became a permanent reminder that even the most polished exterior can conceal profound turmoil and that a single moment of fury can alter the course of a life forever.